The honeymoon I had dreamed about with my husband was almost ruined. When my sister decided to invite herself along, she thought she could insert herself into every moment of our trip. But what she never expected was that the hotel itself would be the one to kick her out. Before we dive into this story, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you never miss a tale of justice. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments. Okay, let's get into it. Asterisk, when I look back on it now, I can laugh. At the time, though, I felt my heart sink into my stomach as I stood in the lobby of a beautiful resort, still glowing from my wedding, and saw my sister dragging her suitcase toward me like she had every right to be there. This was supposed to be the happiest trip of my life. I had spent months planning every detail, from the oceanfront suite with its sweeping balcony to the private excursions my husband and I had chosen to enjoy as a couple. It was meant to be a celebration of love, of starting a new chapter together. But in that single moment, all I could think was, what on earth is she doing here? My sister smiled as if this were perfectly normal, as though it made complete sense that she would just turn up on my honeymoon. Her confidence was almost chilling. She didn't even flinch as she waved at me across the polished marble floor, her sunglasses perched on her head like she was a movie star stepping onto a set. My husband, standing right beside me, squeezed my hand so hard I thought he might crush my fingers. I remember the heat rising in my cheeks, not from the tropical sun that filtered in through the wide glass windows, but from the sheer embarrassment of the scene she was creating. Other guests turned to watch. Staff at the front desk glanced between us, and all I could think was, this cannot be happening. Not here. Not now. Let me back up for a second. My sister has always had this way about her. She was the kind of person who believed that the world owed her something, that she should never have to put in much effort because someone, usually me, would step in to smooth things over. Growing up, I was the one who picked up after her, who lent her money she never repaid, who excused her bad behavior because that's just how she is. But I never, not in a million years, thought she would crash my honeymoon. Before the wedding, she had made little jokes about it. You guys better not forget about me when you're sipping cocktails on the beach. But I laughed them off. Who wouldn't? It sounded absurd. What kind of person would actually book themselves into their sister's honeymoon destination? Apparently, my sister would. The moment she strolled over to us, wheeling her oversized pink suitcase behind her, I felt the weight of years of her entitlement pressing down on me. My husband, still new to the full force of her personality, muttered under his breath, "Is she serious?" His voice was tight, strained. I didn't have an answer. She reached us and pulled me into a hug before I could step back. "Surprise," she said, as if this were some kind of birthday party and not a private trip for two. "Can you believe it?" I thought, why not treat myself and join you guys? It'll be so much fun. Family bonding. I stood frozen, caught between disbelief and a growing sense of dread. This was supposed to be my safe space, my private time with the man I had just promised to spend the rest of my life with. Instead, it suddenly felt like another one of my sister's hijackings, where my wants and needs disappeared under the weight of her demands. My husband's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, but I placed a hand on his arm, silently pleading with him not to start a scene right there in the middle of the lobby. I knew exactly how she would spin it, that he was being cold, unwelcoming, unfair, and then I'd be caught in the middle, the one forced to smooth things over. Again, inside, though, a small voice whispered something I wasn't ready to admit. "This is not going to end well. Not this time." The rest of that day felt like walking on eggshells. Even as we checked into our suite, a space I had envisioned as a sanctuary of romance and relaxation, my thoughts kept circling back to her. She had a room in the same resort. She was here, and she had no intention of giving us space. Looking out at the sparkling blue water from our balcony later that evening, my husband slipped his arms around me and said quietly, "We'll deal with this. Don't let her ruin this for you." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But deep down, I knew my sister. And when she crossed a line, she didn't just tiptoe over it, she barreled straight through, dragging everyone else with her. And in that moment, I realized our honeymoon had just turned into a battlefield. To understand why my sister's sudden rival hit me so hard, you need to know a little about the three of us, the roles we each played long before we ever set foot on that resort's polished floors. Let me start with myself. I've always been the steady one in the family, the dependable daughter, the one people could rely on to fix problems, smooth arguments, keep things from falling apart. I wasn't flashy, and I didn't demand much. What I wanted was simple: a peaceful life, a good marriage, and the ability to enjoy the milestones I worked so hard for. My wedding had been exactly that, a celebration filled with love, joy, and laughter. I wanted the honeymoon to be the same. My husband, Daniel, was cut from the same cloth. If I was the steady one in my family, he was the calm anchor I never knew I needed. He had a way of grounding me when I felt pulled in too many directions. Practical, patient, and thoughtful, Daniel had always encouraged me to stand up for myself more, especially when it came to my sister. He had seen, even in the short time we'd been dating, how easily she could manipulate me with guilt or charm. He never pushed too hard, but he'd say things like, "You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep her warm." Those words stayed with me. And yet, I still found myself bending to her, over and over again. Then there was my sister, Chloe. She was younger than me by 3 years, but she had a way of making it seem like she was the center of the universe. From childhood, Chloe had perfected the art of being the difficult one. While I was studying late nights to keep my grades up, Chloe was sneaking out, chasing excitement, or finding a new mess for my parents to clean up. My mother used to sigh and say, "That's just Chloe," and I, wanting to keep the peace, would pick up the slack. When we grew older, nothing really changed. I paid deposits for apartments she abandoned. I gave her rides when she lost her car. I even covered her rent once when she blew her paycheck on designer shoes. Each time, I told myself it was the last time. Each time, she convinced me otherwise with a mix of crocodile tears and promises she'd do better. But underneath the entitlement was something else. A sharp, calculating awareness. Chloe wasn't oblivious. She knew exactly how to manipulate people. And she played the role of the victim so convincingly that even strangers often rushed to her defense. She was the type to pout her way out of a speeding ticket or bat her eyes for an upgrade she didn't pay for. And more often than not, she got away with it. Before the wedding, Chloe had joked about joining us on our honeymoon. "I'll pack my bikini and crash your trip," she had laughed, tossing her hair back with that same careless smile. I had rolled my eyes and brushed it off. "It's a honeymoon, Chloe. It's for me and Daniel." She'd pouted then, saying, "Oh, so now that you're married you'll forget all about me?" It was a familiar tune, one I'd heard all my life. The guilt-laden suggestion that my happiness was somehow a betrayal of her. Daniel hadn't laughed. I still remember the way his brow furrowed when she made the joke. Later, he'd told me, "She's not kidding, you know. She'll try something." I shook my head. insisting she wouldn't dare. He gave me a look patient, almost resigned, that said he knew Chloe better than I wanted to admit. And so, when she appeared at the resort, dragging that suitcase, part of me wasn't even surprised. Shocked, yes. Horrified, absolutely. But surprised, not really. Deep down, I'd always known Chloe would never let me have a moment entirely to myself. The dynamic between us had been this way for years. I was the giver, she was the taker. I was the one who planned and prepared, who thought about consequences. She was the one who barged in, uninvited, and somehow convinced everyone else to adjust around her. What made this worse, though, was the timing. A honeymoon is not just another vacation. It's not a casual weekend getaway you can squeeze another person into. It's a sacred window of intimacy and reflection, a chance to savor the transition into married life. I had spent countless evenings planning excursions with Daniel, imagining slow walks by the beach, quiet candlelit dinners, and laughter over breakfast in bed. These were things you couldn't replicate or postpone, so when Chloe wheeled up with her oversized suitcase and her smug grin, it wasn't just inconvenient, it was invasive. It was a violation of the one boundary I thought even she wouldn't cross. I glanced at Daniel as she hugged me that first time, reading the look in his eyes. He was furious, though he held it back for my sake. That's the kind of man he was, protective, but careful not to put me in an impossible position. Still, I could feel his disappointment radiating off him, not at me, but at the situation, at her. Later that evening, after we had checked into our suite, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. "I told you she'd try something," he said gently. There was no "I told you so" in his tone, but I heard it anyway. I wrapped my arms around myself and sighed. I didn't think she'd actually do it. Who does this? Who crashes a honeymoon? He looked at me, his eyes softening. Your sister does. Because you let her get away with things no one else would. The words stung, but not because they were unkind. Because they were true. As I stared out at the horizon that night, the waves breaking rhythmically against the shore, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. If Chloe was here, she wasn't going to quietly fade into the background. She was going to make herself the center of our honeymoon, just like she had made herself the center of every major moment in my life. And for the first time, I wondered if this time would be different. If, maybe, Chloe had finally crossed a line too far. The next morning was when it truly sank in that Chloe wasn't just around. She wasn't just on vacation at the same resort by coincidence. She had woven herself directly into our honeymoon. Daniel and I woke up early that first day. Sunlight spilling across the sheets, the sound of waves rolling in through the balcony doors. It was exactly the kind of morning I had dreamed of, quiet, peaceful, filled with the simple joy of waking up beside my new husband. I slipped into a light sundress. Daniel ordered coffee and fruit to the room, and for a fleeting moment I allowed myself to forget the suitcase I'd seen the night before, the hug that had left me stiff and unsettled. We made our way down to the dining area, hand in hand, smiling at the anticipation of the week ahead. But the smile froze on my face when I saw her. Chloe was already there. She sat at a corner table near the window, sunglasses pushed up on her head, phone in hand, sipping orange juice as if she had been waiting for us. The moment she saw me, she waved big, dramatic, attention-grabbing, like she was greeting a long-lost friend. "Good morning, lovebirds," she called, far too loudly. Heads turned. A family at the next table paused mid-bite to stare. My stomach knotted. Daniel muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." I tried to force a polite smile. to minimize the scene, but Chloe was already standing, dragging her chair across the tile with a screech and pulling it right up next to our table. "I thought we could all have breakfast together," she said, plopping down with a grin. "Isn't this resort just gorgeous? I can't believe I snagged a room here last minute. Total luck." Luck, that's what she called it. But I knew Chloe too well. She hadn't just stumbled into this place. She had heard me gush about the resort for months during wedding planning, had probably scouted out the exact dates, and deliberately booked herself in. Daniel caught my eye. He didn't say anything, but his jaw tightened in that way I had learned to read. He was biting back words he knew would ignite a scene, so I did what I always did. I tried to smooth it over. I picked at my plate of fruit, asked her politely about her flight, and tried not to notice the way Daniel sat stiffly beside me, his silence louder than words. But Chloe wasn't content to simply join us for breakfast. No, she had plans. "By the way," she said halfway through her pancakes, "I signed up for that snorkeling trip you guys mentioned. We can all go together. Isn't that perfect?" The fork froze halfway to my mouth. My eyes darted to Daniel's, searching for reassurance. But what I found there was barely contained frustration. His lips pressed into a thin line. I swallowed hard. "Chloe, this is our honeymoon. Some of these activities are..." "Exactly." She cut me off, flashing that practiced smile. And I thought, what better way to celebrate than with family? "You know I've been so stressed lately. This is good for me, too." She said it as if that settled the matter, as if her stress somehow entitled her to carve a place into the most private trip of my life. By the time we returned to our suite that afternoon, I felt like the walls were closing in. I leaned against the balcony railing, staring out at the horizon, trying to breathe through the frustration tightening my chest. Daniel stood behind me, his hands firm on my shoulders. "She's not going to stop," he said quietly. His voice was calm, but beneath it I heard the steel of anger. "She's going to wedge herself into everything. You know that, right?" I did know. I had always known. But admitting it out loud felt like admitting I'd lost control of my own life. My own celebration the next day confirmed it. When Daniel and I returned from a brief walk on the beach, we found Chloe sprawled across the lounge chair in our suite's private balcony, sipping from a cocktail glass she had ordered from room service on our tab. She looked up, all smiles, as though nothing about this was strange. I told them I was family. She explained breezily. "They let me in. Hope you don't mind, I just love this view." Daniel's face flushed with anger. He stepped forward, ready to say something sharp, but I touched his arm again, my silent plea not to escalate. My insides, however, churned with humiliation. "She doesn't see this as wrong. She thinks she belongs here." That was the moment the line was crossed. This wasn't just an inconvenient joke anymore. This wasn't a sister tagging along by coincidence. This was an invasion. She had deliberately, knowingly, inserted herself into the most intimate space of our marriage, and she had no intention of stepping back. As I watched her sip that drink on my balcony, a cold certainty settled over me. Chloe wasn't here for a vacation. She was here to take, to absorb, to leech every ounce of joy from this trip until it revolved around her. And for the first time in my life, I felt something shift. I wasn't just annoyed or embarrassed. I was angry, not the quick, fleeting anger that passed after a sigh and an apology. This was something deeper, heavier, a slow, simmering fire in my chest that told me I couldn't keep playing peacekeeper forever. Because this wasn't just another one of Chloe's antics. This was my honeymoon, and I was determined she wasn't going to steal it from me. Asterisk if I thought Chloe lounging in our private suite was the peak of her audacity. I was wrong. That was only the beginning. Over the next couple of days, she made it her mission to wedge herself into every moment, every plan, every sliver of time Daniel and I had carved out for ourselves. The first sign came at dinner. Daniel and I had reserved a table at the resort's seaside restaurant, a romantic spot where the waves lapped almost against the legs of the deck, and lanterns glowed softly in the evening air. I had looked forward to it for weeks, imagining the sound of the ocean as we clinked glasses and toasted to our future. But when we arrived, Chloe was already there. She sat at a table not 10 feet from ours, waving at us as if she had been waiting all along. "I thought we could make it a family dinner," she announced as we approached. "So I told the hostess we'd all sit together. Don't worry. I ordered appetizers for the table." Daniel stiffened beside me, his lips parted, a sharp retort ready, but I touched his arm again. I didn't want the entire restaurant to witness a scene. So, against every instinct, we sat. The evening that should have been filled with soft conversation and stolen glances turned into Chloe holding court, rambling about her problems back home, her dating misadventures, her financial woes. She didn't ask a single question about us, about how we were adjusting to married life, or even about the wedding itself. It was as if she had forgotten entirely why we were here. By the end of the meal, Daniel's patience was fraying. When Chloe excused herself to the restroom, he leaned close and whispered, "I'm done. I cannot do this for an entire week. She's hijacking everything." I wanted to reassure him, but all I could do was nod. He was right. The next day was worse. Daniel and I had signed up for a private boat excursion, something intimate and special. I had even surprised him by arranging for a small picnic basket to be prepared for us. It was meant to be one of the highlights of our trip. When we walked down to the dock, though, there she was again, standing in her oversized sun hat, chattering with the tour guide. "I told them I was with you," she chirped when she saw us, beaming like she had pulled off something clever. "Isn't this exciting? We'll all go together." The boat was small, built for couples or very small groups. Instead of leaning into Daniel's shoulder and letting the wind whip through our hair, in quiet intimacy, I spent the ride wedged between my husband's silent fury and my sister's endless commentary about how the waves made her stomach queasy. She complained about the sun being too hot, then about the food not being seasoned enough, then about the fact that the boat didn't have better cushions. Daniel sat stiffly, staring out at the water, his jaw clenched. I could almost hear his thoughts. This was supposed to be ours, just ours. That night, I cried in the shower, quietly, so he wouldn't hear. I didn't want him to think I was weak, but the truth was, I felt trapped, torn between the love of my life and the sister I had always enabled, always excused. But Chloe wasn't finished. On the third day, Daniel and I had reserved a couple's spa treatment, massages, facials, the works. It was meant to be indulgent, private, and completely romantic. As we checked in, though, the receptionist frowned at the clipboard. "Excuse me," she said, looking at the schedule. "Are there 3 in your party? We have a note that another guest will be joining." I blinked, confused. "No," I said quickly. "It's just the 2 of us." But then I heard her voice behind me. "No, it's fine. I'm with them." Chloe, she breezed up to the counter, sunglasses perched high, a smug little smile tugging at her lips. "I thought it would be fun for the 3 of us. You don't mind, do you?" Daniel actually laughed, not from humor, but from disbelief. "This is insane," he muttered under his breath. I turned to Chloe, my voice low and firm. This is a couple's treatment. You cannot just insert yourself into everything we do. She pouted, crossing her arms. Wow, way to make me feel unwanted. I thought we were close. I thought you'd be happy to spend time together. And just like that, she had flipped the script, painting herself as the victim. The receptionist glanced between us, awkward and unsure, and I wanted the floor to swallow me whole in the end. I stood my ground just enough to stop her from joining the spa treatment. But the damage was done. The tranquility, the intimacy, it was already poisoned by her intrusion. Later that evening, Daniel finally snapped. We were back in our suite, the balcony doors open to the sound of the waves. He paced the room, his voice low but sharp. This is ridiculous, Anna. She's ruining everything. I didn't pay thousands of dollars to spend my honeymoon third-wheeling with your sister. Tears pricked my eyes, not from his words, but from the truth in them. I sank onto the bed, clutching the sheets in my fists. I know she is. I don't know how to stop her. Daniel stopped pacing and looked at me, his expression softening. Yes, you do. You've always known. You just never want to pull the trigger because you're afraid she'll hate you for it. He was right. I had spent my entire life fearing Chloe's anger, her sulks, her guilt trips. But now, it wasn't just my peace at stake, it was Daniel's too. It was our marriage, and in that moment, I realized something I had never allowed myself to think before. Maybe letting Chloe get away with everything wasn't kindness. Maybe it was cowardice. The days that followed only proved the point. Chloe continued to insert herself everywhere: dinners, activities, even our walks on the beach. She guilt-tripped me with phrases like, "You never include me," or "I came all this way, and you don't even care." She turned every boundary into a crime, every protest into a betrayal. But underneath her antics, something inside me had started to shift. I wasn't just tired anymore. I wasn't just frustrated. I was angry. And for the first time, I began to think about what it might feel like to finally draw a line so clear, so undeniable, that Chloe couldn't cross it. I didn't know how yet, but I knew it was coming. There's always a final straw. A single moment when all the frustration, all the small trespasses that I'd swallowed down, finally collide into something too heavy to bear. For me, that moment came halfway through the week, on what should have been one of the most peaceful afternoons of our honeymoon. Daniel and I had spent the morning at the pool, trying desperately to reclaim some sense of normalcy. We lounged beneath the shade of an umbrella, sipping cool drinks, the sunlight flickering across the water in a way that almost lulled me into believing we could salvage the trip. For a little while, it felt like we were just another couple, enjoying our honeymoon without complications. I remember leaning back, closing my eyes, letting the warmth sink into my skin. Daniel reached over, resting his hand lightly over mine, and I thought, maybe if we just ignore her, she'll get bored. Maybe she'll back off. But Chloe wasn't the type to back off. When we returned to our suite later that afternoon, the door wasn't fully closed. That struck me immediately. Daniel and I were meticulous about locking up. My stomach tightened as I pushed it open. And then I saw her, Chloe. She was sprawled out across the bed, my bed, wearing one of the resort's white robes like she owned the place. A half-empty cocktail glass sat on the nightstand, condensation pooling onto the polished wood. The television was on, muted, and her shoes were kicked carelessly onto the carpet I had picked out in the honeymoon brochure months earlier. She looked up when we walked in, as casual as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "Oh hey, she chirped, tucking her hair behind her ear. I was waiting for you guys. This room is amazing. The view, wow, you're so lucky. I couldn't resist checking it out. I froze in the doorway, my pulse roaring in my ears. I wanted to say something, to scream, but the words stuck in my throat. Daniel, on the other hand, didn't hesitate. His voice was sharp, cutting through the air like glass. What the hell are you doing in here, Chloe? She blinked at him, feigning innocence. Relax. I just told the staff I was your sister, and they let me in. No big deal. I just wanted to hang out. No big deal? Daniel's voice rose, incredulous. This is our private suite. Our honeymoon suite. You don't just barge in here like it's some common lounge. Chloe's smile faltered for the first time. She sat up, her arms crossing defensively. You're overreacting. I'm family. It's not like I'm a stranger. Something inside me snapped then. A quiet, steady anger that had been building for years finally solidified into something immovable. I stepped forward, my voice low but shaking with fury. Chloe, you had no right at all. This is our space, not yours. Do you even hear yourself? Do you realize what you've done? She rolled her eyes, trying to brush it off. God, you're so dramatic. I just wanted to see what it was like. I thought you'd want me around, but apparently, I'm just a burden, huh? And there it was, the same script I had fallen for my entire life. The guilt, the victimhood, the manipulation. Normally, this was the point where I'd back down, apologize, and let her have her way. But standing there in my honeymoon suite, watching her sulk in a robe that wasn't hers, I realized something crystal clear. If I caved this time, I'd be caving for the rest of my life. Daniel's hand brushed against mine, grounding me. His voice was quieter now, but filled with steel. Anna, this has to stop. I nodded, my throat tight. You're right. I turned back to Chloe, who was pouting on the bed as though she were the one who had been wronged. This is not your vacation, I told her, my voice trembling at first, then steadying. This is our honeymoon. And what you just did sneaking into our room, lying to staff, it's beyond inappropriate. It's unacceptable. You've crossed every possible line. She huffed, tossing her hair back. So what are you going to do? Kick me out? You'd really do that to your own sister? I didn't answer her right away, but in that silence, something shifted in me. I realized I wasn't afraid of her tantrums anymore. I wasn't afraid of the fallout, the drama she'd stir up when we got home. What I was truly afraid of, was losing Daniel's trust, losing the sanctity of the marriage we had just begun. And in that moment, the choice was obvious. I didn't know the exact plan yet, but I knew with absolute certainty that this would be the last time. Chloe got away with steamrolling my boundaries. She thought her blood ties gave her immunity, that being family meant she could walk all over me. But not here, not this time. Later that night, as Daniel and I sat on the balcony, the ocean murmuring below us, he spoke the words that anchored my resolve. You can't keep protecting her, he said simply. She's not going to stop until someone stops her. And it has to be you. The final straw had been pulled. The breaking point had been reached. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just angry, I was ready. Ready to do what I should have done years ago. Draw a line so clear that Chloe couldn't charm, guilt, or bully her way across it. This time, she wasn't going to win. That night, long after Chloe had stormed back to her own room in a huff, I sat awake on the balcony, staring out at the dark stretch of ocean. The sound of the waves was steady, soothing, but my mind churned with restless energy. For years, I had lived in Chloe's shadow of entitlement. She created chaos, and I absorbed it. She crossed lines, and I redrew them further out, giving her more space. That pattern had defined our entire relationship, and now it had spilled over into the most sacred trip of my life. But as I sat there, Daniel dozing inside, I realized something with startling clarity. I wasn't powerless. Not here. The resort wasn't our childhood home where my parents would shrug and say, "That's just Chloe." It wasn't the countless apartments or social gatherings where people excused her behavior because she was charming, or pretty, or played the victim. No, this was a private, luxury resort with rules, with policies, with standards. And Chloe had broken them. That was my weapon. The next morning, I quietly gathered what I needed. I scrolled through my phone, saving the text messages Chloe had sent me in the weeks leading up to the wedding, the ones where she had half joked, half threatened about tagging along. I screenshotted the exchange where I had told her, "It's a honeymoon, Chloe. Just me and Daniel." Her reply, "We'll see," suddenly looked far more ominous than playful. I also had proof from the resort itself. A quick look at our room charges revealed that Chloe had ordered cocktails and snacks using our suite number. I took photos of the bill, highlighting the charges I hadn't authorized. And then there was the crown jewel of evidence, the fact that she had gained entry into our suite by lying to staff. Daniel had witnessed it, and I knew the hotel took guest privacy seriously. By mid-morning, my nerves had settled into something sharper, steadier. I dressed carefully, choosing a calm, neutral expression, and walked down to the front desk. The manager on duty was a middle-aged man named Roberto, with a clipped accent and a professional air that suggested he'd dealt with all kinds of difficult guests. I waited until no one else was in earshot before I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "I need to speak with you about a problem. It's a little complicated." Roberto tilted his head, attentive but cautious. "Of course, ma'am. What seems to be the issue?" I explained everything, not in a flustered, emotional rush, but in clear, deliberate detail. My sister had inserted herself into our honeymoon without invitation. She had lied to staff to access our private suite. She had charged items to our room without consent, and she had been disruptive to the point of intruding on our scheduled activities. As I spoke, Roberto's expression hardened. When I showed him the screenshots of our messages and the photos of the unauthorized charges, he nodded grimly. "This is a serious violation of our policies," he said at last. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "Guests are not permitted to enter another party's suite under any circumstances, even if they are family. And unauthorized charges." He shook his head. "That is considered fraud." Hearing those words felt like a release, like someone had finally acknowledged what I had been enduring all my life. Chloe's behavior wasn't just rude, it was wrong. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I don't want a scene," I told him softly. "This is supposed to be my honeymoon, but I need this to stop. I need her out of my space, out of our plans, out of this resort if that's what it takes." Roberto inclined his head, professional and reassuring. "Leave it to us, ma'am. We will handle this discreetly, but firmly. You and your husband will not have to worry about her disrupting your stay any longer." A shiver of relief ran through me. For the first time since Chloe had arrived, I felt the weight lifting from my shoulders. I wasn't going to have to fight her directly, at least not in the way I had feared. The hotel itself, the very rules she had tried to bend, would become the walls she couldn't climb. That afternoon, Daniel noticed the change in me. We were sitting by the pool, the sun glinting off the water, when he reached over and touched my hand. "You seem calmer," he said, studying me. I smiled faintly, a secret flickering in my chest. "Because I have a plan." He raised an eyebrow. "Should I ask?" "Not yet," I replied, squeezing his hand. "But trust me, she's not going to get away with this." And for the first time since our trip had begun, Daniel smiled back. Over the next day, I let Chloe carry on as usual. She joined us for breakfast uninvited, complained about the humidity, tried to rope me into an afternoon of shopping at the resort boutique. I played along, nodding, smiling, giving her just enough rope to believe she was still in control. Inside, though, I knew the tables had turned. The resort staff was watching now. Every boundary she crossed, every tantrum she threw, was being quietly documented. I didn't need to shout or argue. I didn't need to plead with her to stop. The weight of her own entitlement was already pressing down on her, and I had set the stage for the collapse. It was almost poetic, really. Chloe had always relied on charm and manipulation to bulldoze through life. But here, in this place, the very rules she thought she could twist would be the weapon that undid her. I didn't feel guilt. Not anymore. For the first time in my life, I felt something stronger. Control. When you've spent your whole life being manipulated by someone, there's a certain thrill in watching the tables finally turn. I had carried the burden of Chloe's behavior for decades, always smoothing things over, always folding to her guilt trips. But now, for the first time, I was standing back and letting her dig her own grave. And the best part, she had no idea. The day it all came to a head started like any other on the trip. Chloe was buzzing around us from the moment we stepped into the dining hall for breakfast. Her voice a little too loud, her energy just slightly manic, as though she could sense something shifting but didn't know what. "So," she announced, plopping herself down at our table without asking, "what's the plan today? I heard there's a private wine tasting in the garden. We should totally do that together. It'll be such a vibe." Daniel shot me a look across the table, one that said, "I can't take much more of this." I only gave him a small, steady smile, because I knew something he didn't yet. Today was the day. I had spoken again with Roberto that morning, just after sunrise, while Chloe was still asleep. He had assured me that the staff was prepared to intervene at the first visible disruption, the first undeniable moment that made her intrusion impossible to ignore. "We will handle it professionally, but firmly," he had said. "She will not be allowed to continue harassing you." And so, I let Chloe tag along that day. She followed us to the beach, chattering endlessly about how she deserved a trip like this after all the stress she'd been under. She inserted herself into every photo Daniel and I tried to take, wedging between us with a practiced smile as if she belonged there. When we returned to the poolside for lunch, she ordered 2 cocktails on our suite number without even asking. I didn't say a word. Instead, I sat back, sipping slowly at my iced tea, letting her string together all the evidence she needed to be undone. By the time evening rolled around, I could sense Daniel's breaking point. He leaned against the railing of our balcony as we dressed for dinner, his voice low and tight. "Anna, I can't do another night of this. She's made this entire trip miserable. If we don't stop her tonight, I don't know how I'll look back at this week without resentment." I turned to him, smoothing the skirt of my dress, my reflection calm in the mirror. "Trust me," I said softly. "Tonight will be different." And it was. The resort's signature restaurant was the setting for Chloe's downfall. It was the kind of place you made reservations for weeks in advance. Soft lighting, polished wood tables, a terrace that overlooked the ocean. Guests dressed up for it, treating dinner there as an event. Daniel and I had been saving it for one of our last nights, wanting to make it special. When we arrived, Chloe was already waiting in the lobby, a smug grin plastered across her face. "There you are. I told the hostess we're a party of 3. I hope that's okay." Daniel muttered something sharp under his breath, but I only smiled faintly. "Of course you did." She blinked at me, thrown off by the lack of resistance, but quickly recovered. "It'll be so fun," she said brightly, looping her arm through mine as though we were allies. The hostess led us to a table near the terrace, the sea breeze drifting in through open windows. Chloe launched into a monologue almost immediately, complaining about the resort Wi-Fi, then about how slow her room service had been, then about how tired she was of cheap men back home. I nodded occasionally, keeping my expression neutral, my heartbeat steady. I wasn't nervous, I was waiting. And then it happened. When the waiter came to take our drink orders, Chloe waved her hand dismissively. "Just put it all on their room," she said, gesturing at me and Daniel. "We've been sharing bills all week." The words barely left her mouth before Roberto appeared. As if on cue, he approached our table with 2 members of the security staff, their presence subtle but unmistakable. "Miss Chloe," he said smoothly, his voice carrying just enough weight to draw the attention of nearby diners. "May I have a word with you?" Chloe blinked, startled. "Oh sure, I guess." But Roberto didn't wait for her to rise. Instead, he spoke clearly enough for every table within earshot to hear. "You have repeatedly violated this resort's policies. You entered a private suite without authorization, made fraudulent charges to another guest's account, and disrupted multiple private reservations." The dining hall went silent. Chloe's mouth fell open, her face draining of color. "What? No, that's not true. They're my family." She jabbed a finger in my direction, her voice rising in panic. "She's my sister." She said it was fine. Every eye in the restaurant turned toward us. I sat very still, my hands folded in my lap, meeting Roberto's gaze with calm confirmation. "No, I didn't," I said softly but firmly. "I told you not to come. You weren't invited." Chloe's lips trembled. "You can't do this to me," she hissed, looking between me, Daniel, and the manager. "I came all this way. You're seriously going to throw me out? On vacation?" Roberto's tone was unyielding. "Yes, miss. Effective immediately. You are no longer welcome on the premises. Our staff will assist you in arranging transportation to alternate accommodations. Your charges tonight will not be covered by your sister's suite." The security guard stepped closer, not aggressive, but firm enough to make the message clear. She was leaving, and just like that, the control Chloe had always wielded over me, the guilt, the manipulation, the entitlement slipped through her fingers. I watched her sputter, her cheeks flushing red as diners pretended not to stare, their curiosity unmistakable. For once, I didn't feel shame. I felt relief because finally, Chloe wasn't my problem to handle. Finally, someone else was drawing the line she could not cross. And tonight, her downfall had only just begun. The silence in the restaurant was deafening. Forks hovered in midair, glasses paused halfway to lips. Dozens of eyes flicked between Chloe, standing pale and sputtering, and Roberto, who stood calm and immovable like a stone wall. For a split second, I thought she might back down. That maybe just this once she'd swallow her pride and leave quietly. But that wasn't Chloe's way. Her voice cracked as she raised it, desperation lacing every word. "This is insane. You can't just throw me out like some criminal. I'm family. I belong here." Her tone climbed higher, sharp enough to pierce the low hum of the restaurant's soft background music. A couple at the next table leaned subtly away, their expressions caught somewhere between discomfort and fascination. Roberto didn't flinch. His voice was calm, measured, but firm enough to echo across the room. "Miss, your behavior has violated the privacy of our guests and the integrity of this resort. Family or not, you are not entitled to disregard rules or harass others." The word harass landed like a slap. Chloe's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Anna, tell them I'm not harassing you. You wanted me here, didn't you? You said you'd include me." For years, this had been her tactic, dragging me into the middle, forcing me to smooth things over. But this time, I didn't bite. I sat very still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, and met her gaze. "No," I said quietly, but clearly enough for the nearby diners to hear. "I told you not to come. This is our honeymoon. You invited yourself." The color drained from her face. For the first time, there was no clever comeback, no dramatic performance that could twist the narrative in her favor. My words hung in the air, undeniable. Daniel reached over and placed his hand gently over mine. His touch was warm, grounding. I felt years of pent-up tension unravel in that single gesture. He didn't need to say anything, his eyes told me everything. He was proud of me. Chloe, meanwhile, began to unravel. "This is ridiculous," she shrieked, her voice breaking. "You can't treat me like this. I spent money to come here. I deserve to enjoy myself too." A murmur rippled through the restaurant. Guests turned to each other, whispering, shaking their heads. Some rolled their eyes. Others simply watched the spectacle unfold like a play. Roberto gestured subtly to the two security staff. They stepped forward, their presence quiet but unyielding. "Miss," he said, his tone still polite, but final, "you will need to collect your belongings. Our staff will escort you to the front desk to settle your account. You are no longer permitted to stay here." Chloe's eyes widened in horror. "No refund?" she gasped, clutching her bag as though it might shield her. Roberto shook his head. "No refund. Your conduct has voided your stay." That was the breaking point. Chloe's voice cracked into a scream. "This is all your fault," she yelled, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You did this, Anna. You turned them against me. You've always been jealous, always trying to make me look bad." The room fell even quieter, if that were possible. My cheeks burned not from shame, but from the absurdity of her accusation. After years of bending over backward to protect her, to shield her from consequences, this was her narrative? That I had conspired against her? Daniel's voice broke through, steady and sharp. "Enough." He rarely raised his voice, but when he did, it cut through everything. "This is our honeymoon, Chloe, not yours. You've embarrassed yourself enough. Leave." She gaped at him, stunned into silence for half a beat, before turning back to me with pleading eyes. "Anna, please, don't let them do this. Don't let him do this. We're sisters. You're supposed to have my back." I drew in a slow breath. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady when I replied. "I've had your back my whole life, Chloe. But not this time. Not anymore." Her face crumpled. For the first time, she seemed to truly realize she was cornered, that no amount of guilt-tripping or theatrics would rescue her. The security guards stepped forward. One gently gestured toward the door. "This way, miss." And then it happened. The walk of shame. Chloe grabbed her bag with shaking hands. Her shoulders hunched as she stumbled toward the exit. The restaurant's polished floors echoed with each click of her heels. Guests turned in their chairs to watch her go, some curious, some pitying, some barely hiding their smirks. I sat frozen, my breath shallow, watching her retreat. It was surreal, seeing my sister, the master manipulator, the woman who had controlled so much of my life, reduced to this, flustered, powerless, and escorted out by strangers at the door. She turned one last time, her face streaked with angry tears. "You'll regret this," she spat, her voice cracking. "You think he'll stick around when you treat your own sister like trash. You'll end up alone, and then you'll wish you had me." But the words fell flat. No one rushed to her defense. No one pitied her. Roberto gave a short nod to the guards, and they guided her through the doors. The moment she disappeared, the tension in the room broke. Diners resumed their conversations. Waiters bustled about. The soft clinking of cutlery filled the air once more. But for me, time seemed to stand still. I sat there, hands trembling slightly in Daniel's, my heart thudding with the weight of what had just happened. 4 years. I had imagined what it might look like if Chloe were ever forced to face real consequences. And now, here it was played out in the most public, undeniable way possible. Daniel squeezed my hand. "You did it," he whispered, and for the first time in a long, long while, I felt free. After Chloe was escorted out of the restaurant, I thought the worst was over. But the true moment of justice, the one that still makes me smile when I think back on it, came later that night. When the resort finally lowered the hammer for good, Daniel and I finished our dinner in a kind of stunned silence. The food was exquisite, perfectly seasoned fish, delicate vegetables, a glass of wine that should have been the highlight of the evening, but my appetite was dulled. I was replaying everything in my head. Chloe's shrieks, the way she'd pointed at me in desperation, the look on her face when I finally told her no. Daniel reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "Don't second-guess yourself," he said softly, reading the storm in my expression. "She needed to hear it. She needed to see that she can't treat you like this anymore." I nodded, swallowing hard. A part of me wanted to cry, not from sadness but from the release of it all, the weight of years of enabling her finally lifted as we walked back toward our suite. The cool night air brushing against my skin, I noticed Roberto waiting discreetly in the lobby. He stepped forward, his demeanor calm but purposeful. "Mrs. Collins," he said with a polite nod, "I wanted to inform you that we've taken care of everything." Daniel and I paused, exchanging a glance. "Everything?" I asked. He gave a small smile. "Your sister has been escorted to her room to collect her belongings. Security is helping her settle her account now. She will not be allowed to remain on the property overnight. A car has been arranged to take her to alternate accommodations. And," he lowered his voice slightly, "her name will be placed on our internal blacklist. She is permanently banned from returning to this resort." The words sank in slowly, like honey spreading through warm tea. Permanently banned. For once, there would be no undoing. No half-hearted apology followed by the same old behavior. This was final. Irrevocable. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Thank you so much." Roberto inclined his head. "It is our duty to ensure that our guests enjoy the privacy and peace they are entitled to. You deserve nothing less." As he walked away, Daniel slipped his arm around me. I leaned into him, feeling a rush of gratitude for him, for the hotel staff, but most of all, for myself, because I had finally chosen to stand my ground. Not long after, we witnessed the final act of Chloe's undoing. We were on our balcony, sipping the last of our wine, when I heard a commotion below. I stepped to the railing and looked down toward the front entrance of the resort. There she was, Chloe, dragging her oversized pink suitcase behind her, her face blotchy and red from tears and rage. Two security staff stood nearby, their posture polite but firm, ensuring she didn't re-enter the lobby. A driver waited beside a sleek black car, its trunk already open, even from up on the balcony. I could hear her voice carrying through the night air. "This is outrageous. You can't just treat me like this. Do you know who I am?" Her words rang hollow, brittle. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. The confident, entitled sister who always seemed untouchable was suddenly reduced to a flustered woman, with nowhere to go, her theatrics falling flat in the cool night air. I watched as she tried one last time to argue with the staff, her hands flailing, her voice breaking, but the security guard simply gestured toward the car, unyielding. After a long moment, Chloe threw her head back, muttered something I couldn't catch, and shoved her suitcase into the trunk herself. Then she climbed into the back seat, slamming the door. The car pulled away, its taillights glowing briefly before disappearing into the distance. Beside me, Daniel let out a low whistle. "Well," he said, his voice dry. That was satisfying. I couldn't help it. I laughed. A quiet, breathless laugh that grew until my chest ached. For the first time in years, the knot in my stomach loosened completely. Chloe was gone, truly gone. I turned to Daniel, my laughter fading into a soft smile. "She never saw it coming," I whispered. He grinned, pulling me into his arms. "No," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of my head, "but she should have, because that was the truth of it." Chloe's downfall wasn't random. It wasn't cruel. It was the inevitable result of her own choices, her arrogance, her entitlement, her refusal to respect boundaries. And as I stood there in Daniel's arms, the night air cool against my skin, I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been poetic. The honeymoon I had feared was ruined had suddenly been salvaged, not just because Chloe was gone, but because I had finally learned something about myself. I wasn't her doormat anymore, and she had been forced to learn that the hard way. With her suitcase in tow and a permanent band stamped on her name. The morning after Chloe was escorted out of the resort, I woke to the sound of waves lapping against the shore and the warmth of sunlight spilling across our suite. For the first time since we'd arrived, I felt at peace. No nervous glances over my shoulder, no forced smiles as Chloe inserted herself where she didn't belong. Just quiet, uninterrupted stillness. Daniel stirred beside me, his arm sliding over my waist. "She's really gone," he murmured, half asleep, as if he needed to hear it aloud to believe it. "She's gone," I confirmed, a soft smile curving my lips that felt surreal. For years, I had lived in a cycle where Chloe created chaos, and I cleaned it up. It was such a deeply ingrained pattern that, even after she left, I found myself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the knock on the door, the dramatic apology, the plea for forgiveness. But no knock came, no apology, just silence, and the gift of finally being free. We spent the next few days soaking in the honeymoon the way it was meant to be. Long walks on the beach, quiet candlelit dinners, lazy mornings wrapped in white sheets as sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains. Every moment felt sweeter, more precious, because I knew how close we had come to losing it. And yet, in the back of my mind, I couldn't help replaying everything that had happened. The look on Chloe's face when Roberto had confronted her, the way her voice had cracked as she begged me to take her side, the slam of the car door as she was driven away. A part of me grieved not for her consequences, but for the years I had wasted protecting her from them. I thought about all the times I had shielded her from the fallout of her own choices. All the times I had sacrificed my own peace to keep her comfortable. And I realized something painful but liberating. Every time I had done that, I had only delayed the inevitable. Chloe had always been headed for a fall. She had built her life on entitlement and manipulation, and sooner or later, the world was going to push back. It just so happened that the first real push came on my honeymoon when Daniel and I returned home. Chloe tried, of course, to spin the story. She called our parents, sobbing into the phone about how cruel I had been, how I had teamed up with the hotel to humiliate her. She told friends that Daniel had turned me against her, painting herself as the abandoned sister who had only wanted to spend time with family. But the thing about public scenes is that they're hard to rewrite. Guests at the resort had seen her tantrums, had watched her being escorted out. Word traveled fast, and by the time Chloe tried to paint herself as the victim, the truth was already out there. Even my parents, who had spent years excusing her behavior with sighs and shrugs, hesitated this time. My mother's voice was uncertain when she called me. Chloe told us she was treated unfairly, but, well, it sounds like she crossed a line. She didn't just cross it, I said firmly. She obliterated it, and I won't keep pretending that's okay. For once, my words weren't met with silence or disappointment. My mother simply sighed, a weary sound, and said, maybe it's time she faced some consequences. That was the moment I knew the cycle was finally broken. Chloe didn't speak to me for months after that. The silence was a strange kind of gift. I filled that space with other things, with Daniel, with my work, with friendships that didn't drain me dry. For the first time, I lived without the constant weight of Chloe's demands pressing down on me. And when she finally did reach out, it wasn't with an apology. It was with another request, another plea for help, some bill she couldn't pay, some mess she wanted me to fix. This time, I didn't answer, because I had learned something on that honeymoon. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're survival, and enforcing them doesn't make me a bad sister, it makes me a whole person, one who finally values her own peace. As for Chloe, last I heard, she was still bouncing from one crisis to the next, always finding someone else to bail her out. Maybe someday she'll learn, maybe not, but that's no longer my responsibility. When I think back on our honeymoon now, I don't just remember the chaos she caused. I remember the turning point it became for me. A line drawn in the sand, washed clean by the tide, leaving behind something new and solid. I remember sitting on the balcony that last night, Daniel's arm around me, the ocean stretching out endless and blue, and realizing I felt lighter than I had in years. Chloe had been forced to face her consequences, and I had finally stepped out from under her shadow. The moral of the story: justice isn't always about grand gestures or dramatic revenge. Sometimes it's as simple as letting someone face the consequences of their own actions, without shielding them, without softening the blow. And sometimes, justice means finally saying no. For me, that lesson came on my honeymoon, the trip that almost became a nightmare, but instead turned into the moment I reclaimed my own life. And I've never looked back. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.